So welcome to the July 2025 Organic Farmers Association Collective Farmers Circle. And today we have a guest speaker, Rami Aburomia, who I love saying his name. It just kind of rolls off your tongue. And he's going to talk about organic orchard management with kind of a focus on what people would be thinking about in midsummer. Um, Next slide. But first, I want to say who is the Organic Farmers Association? Next slide. We are an association of organic farmers. We do quite a bit of advocacy at the state level and the federal level, pushing for policies that will help organic farmers. As you know, many of you have tried to work with Farm Service Agency or Natural Resources Conservation Service or try to get crop insurance. You would know that there are many barriers because they just don't understand our systems, but we are working with them and have had actually quite a bit of success. Next slide. So we actually have work groups where we get together and we talk about issues that people and successes that they might be having with the Natural Resources Conservation Service or with crop insurance or issues with organic imports, especially in the grain world, that might be kind of undercutting the prices and having discussions about what we can do. And also the NOSB is the National Organic Standards Board that meets twice a year, and we meet and discuss the issues so we can put together public comments. One thing I just want to say that's very exciting is recently we had helped farmers that had been involved in a bankruptcy, organic farmers, and they were clawing back some of the money that they had been given from 2 years ago, if you can believe that. And we were able to get them to pay. We worked with lawyers and really helped a lot of the 90 farmers affected to pay a lot less money. And then we worked with the Farm Bureau in Iowa, and many of the farmers were in Iowa. And now the state of Iowa has put forward a indemnity fund to kind of pay back the farmers so they wouldn't have had to pay anything in that clawback. And we approached Farm Bureau about it, and we were really kind of the spearhead on trying to get something to happen. And so it just, you may think nobody's going to help me, but if you just keep pushing, sometimes you can get a win. Next slide. So Rami, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I've been to his farm, his beautiful location, and you'll see that in the slides.
Okay, well, thank you, Harriet. And yeah, there's quite a few slides here, so we're gonna kind of maybe be hustling through these, but I think if anybody has any questions, here on the live Zoom, then just you could throw them in the chat and just interrupt me as we're going. So yeah, my name's Rami Aburomia. Mostly what we're going to be talking about is my orchard, Adams to Apples. We planted in 2015. It's about 5 acres of free fruit, mostly apples, but also pears, peaches, some plums. Um, and really kind of our guiding principle or whatever, our guiding principle we're thinking about is just to produce high quality apples that people can eat fresh, so out of hands. We sell them all just in our own county, probably within 30 miles or less. And then also just to grow apples that taste really outstanding. So I've eaten a lot of apples from a lot of different places. And even if they're fresh, an organic apple really can have a spectacular taste. Okay, so we can go next slide. I didn't start growing organically. I started growing apples in 2004, and well, somewhere between 10 and 18 years, depending how you want to look at it, I was also growing IPM, so integrated pest management, or conventional apples. Um, I was working for someone else to do that, and then things changed where I started my own orchard here. So I maybe have a little bit different perspective in that, I kind of laid the foundation for how an orchard should be in a IPM or a conventional orchard, um, which kind of changes how you look at things a little bit. So that was Apple Garden, and now Adams to Apples is the only thing I'm doing. I'm not involved in the other orchard anymore. So that's just kind of my apple trajectory here. Okay, next one. So here's our place. Although it looks flat from space, it's not. It's all hilly. Um, and so that means there's no big one large block, which would sure be handy. So instead, there's these five blocks of different sizes, all on different hilly terrain, which honestly makes management a pain, but it also makes it more beautiful. So we get that trade-off. Um, what the whole farm is 25 acres, so kind of the remainder that's not an orchard or buildings is kind of an ongoing prairie oak savanna restoration that seems to take up a lot of my time. Um, but the way I think of it is like the ecosystem that's around the orchard is feeding the orchard the beneficials, the beneficial insects, um, the birds, things like that, that hopefully support the orchard. On the other hand, wood lots and other things can also have diseases that can also go into the orchard. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but okay, next one. So our orchard is all high density, which means that we are grow trees that are close together on dwarf rootstock. So our trees are planted in a row 3 feet apart, and each row is 12 feet. So, 12 foot on center. So that comes out to about 1,200 trees an acre. Um, high density is pretty much what new orchards are being planted as. People don't grow large self-supporting trees that much anymore. And a lot of, well, we'll just focus here. And then, so you can see it's all on posts and wires. So there's 14-foot posts that are 4 feet in the ground and five wires on every row. And those wires are what support the trees. And the trees are clipped to the wire, and the whole orchard is irrigated. So um, definitely when you're starting out, having an orchard with dwarf rootstock, you're going to need some kind of irrigation. Okay, we can go. Um, so like I said, the goal of our orchard is to produce number one apples. And a goal of 75%, but that really depends on the variety. Some varieties pack out a really good percentage of number one apples, and other varieties don't. Um, that's a bigger story that if people had questions we could get into, but basically the for Adams to Apples, the plan with all those 65 varieties, the plan is to always be picking new varieties all through the fall season. So we're not just picking, 1,000 bushels of Portland or something and selling those from the middle of September until Christmas when they're maybe not so fresh. But we're picking new varieties, selling them within a couple of weeks, picking the next one, selling those. So it's always a really fresh, good taste, and the varieties are constantly changing. Kind of our bread and butter varieties, which are things that a lot of people know, things like Zestar, Honeycrisp, Liberty, Crimson Crisp. Um, I would say those and others make up the bulk of what we sell, but we also have a lot of unusual varieties where maybe we just have 45 trees, or well, to put it better, like say 20 bushel of something like Williams Pride, Ashmead's Kernel, Belle de Boscoup, Roxbury Russet is another one. Um, bergamots, russet. So there's a lot of unusual varieties. And what that does is kind of always bringing new varieties for customers to try out and kind of create some excitement instead of kind of always buying Honeycrisp every time. And even the kind of what I call the Honeycrisp diehards that just want their Honeycrisp, when they come to buying apples from, say, the farmer's market from us, um, I'll point them and say, we got these other varieties, you should try these, and that kind of widens their outlook on the apple scene. So, and then I kind of missed, a majority of our apples are sold. Well, I'd say it's about 50. Well, I think we have another slide, so we can go forward. Yeah, there we go. So we sell, a good portion of our apples at farmers markets. Um, Next is wholesale, and then we do an add-on to other vegetable CSA farms. So vegetable farms have their CSA members, and through those farms, those people add on an apple CSA to their vegetable CSA. So we do that, and then we also have an on-farm store that we have been doing just for 10 years, but it's been no, just for 2 years, but it's been growing every year pretty well. So that's kind of exciting. You can see how we sell. It's kind of a free choice. Pick your own at the farmers market. So we just have boxes of loose apples, all with variety names and descriptions. And we just let people pick what they want, and then we weigh it up and charge them that way. So that way people can try new things. Um, I really like that way. I think our customers do too. So, okay, we can go to the next one. Um, we don't have to go through all of this, but it's there for if people want to see it. But kind of the pros and cons of higher density orchards versus, so this is the higher density orchard of planting trees, for example, every 3 feet on 12-foot rows versus bigger, the traditional freestanding orchard, which might be trees every 12 feet on 20-foot rows. So there's advantages and disadvantages to each. But before starting this farm, at the previous farm, I did grow on both systems, and I really liked the advantages of the higher density system. So that's why I went that way. Okay, we can keep going. Next slide. So with a high density system, you really want a narrow, slender tree, which means you're going to have no branches. And once that tree fills its space, you're going to want it to be really focused on fruiting. So this picture might look weird. We already picked the bottom apples on this tree, and we just haven't picked the tops yet. That's why it looks funny like that. I like the system for being organic too, because growing organic apples, east of the Rockies is tough because we have all that moisture and pest pressure is high. So this allows the apples to kind of be out in the air and not tucked into a tree where there's more pest disease and moisture. Um, it also makes picking a lot easier, thinning a lot easier. When you spray the trees, it's more efficient than those big trees. So for all those reasons, that's kind of why I went with the high density system. Okay. Just more about high density of how of why it's a little bit more efficient system, and just giving my perspective. Other people might say, well, that high density system costs too much, I'm not doing that, I'm doing it the old fashioned way, and that's fine too. But this is the kind of thing that I sketched out and kind of keeps me in line when I'm growing new trees. So to the left of this line is more of a high density where the trees are close together. To the right is more of an old-fashioned lower density. And maybe the top scenario is year one, year two, year three, something like that. So you can see as the high density system starts to fill their space, there's not that much open space between the trees. It's more of like a two-dimensional hedge. Whereas on the older big trees, you have all this space that you're kind of losing to uh, non-fruiting, non-tree area. So, so if you're thinking that you're spraying, or even just like if you don't have that much land, you're losing a lot of space by doing the older, lower density system. So that's another reason why I went with the high density. I don't have a whole lot of space, so I went that way. Okay, let's keep going. Well, we use a lot of platforms for doing a lot of the work in the orchard. So you can buy a fancy $120,000 platform like the picture on the left. We just found an old trailer that we pull with a tractor that's up about 5 feet, and you can stand on that and do a lot of the work that way. Um, so, here's a picture of my kid and her friends, and they're all picking Gold Rush at the end of the year. So, whereas you wouldn't want all these little kids up on ladders, doing it on the platform is a lot safer and a lot less physical hardship to get things done. So in this 5 acre orchard, we probably use ladders like 5% of the time just to get something that's got missed by platforms, but we almost always use platforms for everything. And you can see also all the bins and boxes behind them. So then I think these guys have bags, but you're not walking back and forth through the orchard emptying your bag, which is also physically difficult. You got your bins and crates coming with you on the trailer. Okay, next one. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into what the year looks like, and this is kind of the way I break up my year. And so, winter, kind of gets you up till April, and that's when you're doing pruning and repairs on machinery, thinking about how you're going to sell your apples, maybe doing some infrastructure improvements and going to field days and getting yourself educated for the next year. The growing season, pretty much from bud break until, I mean, it's really kind of the early middle of August for us. Um, Planting new blocks, training trees, a lot of pest management, some weed control. And, if you're still kind of getting started, you're still kind of working on getting your marketing ducks in a row. And then, really for me, once I get to August, everything gets dropped except for picking, packing, and selling. That's it. So if you didn't get something done during the growing season, then to me, that is just going to get left until November when everything's done. Because really, once it's harvest and selling season, probably that's all you got time to do. And you really got to be focused on picking apples at the right time and getting them into customers' mouths. Okay, next slide. Um, Thinning fruit is extremely important. Um, so for all these reasons here, the tree that is too overcropped will stress the tree out. Keeping a medium crop on the tree will keep the tree in balance between vegetative and fruit crop. It allows better air movement through the fruit, less instant contact with two fruit or touching. Your apple size will be better. And also some varieties, if you have an overcrop, won't like Honeycrisp or Zestar or Gold Rush actually too. None of those, or Suncrisp is another one. Um, they really won't ripen to good flavor if there's too many crops on the tree, too if the crop load is too high. Okay, next one. So anyway, this is kind of just an example from a while back, but the top row Honeycrisp are from clustered fruit that were, more than one fruit together, and the bottom were apples that were, you could call them singulated. So each fruit is hanging on its own. So you can kind of see the color's better, the size is better. And And amazingly, fruit that is clustered, I mean, it might just be because they're all together, but they tend to get more problems than singulated fruit. So, yeah. Okay, so next slide. Just kind of two pictures. We don't have to go into exactly what I do for it, but it's a combination of some chemical thinning at bloom and a lot of hand thinning when the fruit is still small. So you can see this top picture with a bunch of clustered fruit, and then at the bottom would be more of a properly thin branch. You know, if you want to think about it, you pretty much want like 6 to 8 inches between every fruit, and that's kind of a good rule of thumb. Okay, next one. Okay, so one of the real challenges, I think there's really not any good solution for organic orchards, is how you manage all the vegetation under the trees. So in the early years of growing a tree, weeds, grass, can all really compete with the tree so that you don't get good growth in the first couple years. So you have to do something. I think growing a tree in just sod is not going to be good. So whether that is killing the sod or growth and then mulching it and somehow keeping that sod down, or using some kind of cultivation, but that tree really has a small root system, and those first couple years are critical. Once the trees get bigger, they're throwing some shade underneath, and they have a bigger root system. They can compete better with, weeds and other plants under there, but those first years are critical. So I use a couple of tools for doing that, and you can see it looks, this is obviously a picture of when it looked really good. Didn't always look like this, but a weed badger is a tool that could be used on a tractor to cultivate in between the trees. A Williston cultivator is another cultivator that can be used just to kind of run down the row, but it won't get the weeds in between the tree trunks. So, and then, you could also just do it by hand if you had a smaller orchard. I think that would be fine, using things like cardboard down. Also, there's a lot of kind of companion plants like comfrey that can compete with grass pretty well. But I would still say, even with those nice companion plantings, you still want to kind of keep those at a minimum for the first couple of years until you get your tree grown.
Can you
Um,
also just talk about the
oh,
irrigation that you have there? How the irrigation is up high so you can do that
oh,
cultivating?
yep. Yeah, thanks. So, like I said, this is there's 5 wires in this 10-foot trellis, and that bottom wire, if you can see down there where that bottom wire comes in from the post, there's an irrigation tube that's clipped to that wire. Yep, right there. So right where that, yeah, I can't show you, but kind of right down there in the bottom right-hand corner of the picture. Um, it's just an irrigation line clipped to the post. And so that is irrigation tubing. I think it's like half-inch or 17 millimeter tubing that has drip every 2 feet. Um, some years that gets turned on and run for 2 weeks straight. Other years, like this one in Wisconsin, it's been super wet. I turned it on for a couple days in the spring and hasn't been turned on again. So, but again, for young trees, that irrigation is going to be critical. Maybe you could, honestly, at the other orchard, we had high density orchard without any irrigation, but in dry years you can really see the trees stressed, and also the apple size minimize, or not kind of reaching their full potential in dry years.
So
So
are there actually like emitters that go down to the ground, or is it just stripped from up there?
yep, just drips from up there. Yep, drips from up there. And so the way that the tube goes along, there's actually clips at every 2 feet. So even though, because it's kind of like this through there, so the water runs and it hits a clip, and then that's where it drops.
Mm.
So you need some kind of thing. Otherwise, at every low spot, all the water will run to that spot and go straight down. You'll have all these dry spots. So, um, yeah, so having that up off the ground, I think that's even IPM growers who use herbicide to spray their orchard, they're all putting them up because there's also animals and things in dry years will chew on that tubing to try to get water out of there. People have said coyotes chew on it, rabbits, rodents, everything. So keeping it up there, it's a little work at first, but then once it's up there, it's out of your way. So it's pretty nice. Okay, we can move to the next one. Just some pictures of the tools that I used or have used. So there's the weed badger. So that's a hydraulically driven cultivator where you can control how this head goes in and out of the rows. It's very slow. So, it probably takes about an hour and a half to go through an acre of orchard, but that's not horrible. I was worried that those tines would kind of rip up roots and things, but I haven't had any trouble with vigor in my orchard. So I think even a little shallow cultivation on roots is not too horrible. The guy on the right there, that's something I just kind of put together. But a Williston cultivator is a pretty common piece of machinery that is used in corn and other things back before Roundup Ready corn and stuff. So those can be found, and that's just one unit from a big Williston cultivator put on a 3 point. So that obviously doesn't go in and out of the tree row, but just skirts along on both sides. What they sometimes call swish sandwich, because you're cultivating on both sides of the tree, but not right down the middle of the row. Um, so yeah, with a combination of those, okay, we can go to the next slide. You can okay, just looking at the picture on the right, you can kind of see how that's been cultivated. And it's a little messy, it's not completely, but a lot of the grasses and things in there are getting ready to die after going through with the weed badger. Um, okay, so my trees are older now. They're about, well, somewhere between 1 year, and most of them are more like 8 or 9 years old, which we don't have a picture of yet. But I've been using a lot of wood chips now under the trees. Um, that is not a permanent one and done solution, but it is great because it holds in a lot of the moisture. It's great for the soil. Maybe it keeps weeds down somewhat, but perennial weeds will start growing through that. So you can't think you're just going to throw down a bunch of wood chips and be done with it. Weeds are going to start coming through. So either you're going to do the wood chips for a couple years and then come through and cultivate again, um, or you're going to mow under there. Pretty much those are your options. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's more kind of what it looks like now. You can see the trees are a lot bigger, and this, I think, picture, well, I think this is probably a picture from the fall. Um, and by the end of the season, you kind of let some things grow under there and some weeds grow, and then are eventually going to kind of winter kill in the winter. And that's obviously, well, to me, that's not competing with the actual tree. It's just a little cover under there, and that's no problem. Doesn't need to be like an herbicide strip clean, but you want to not have a lot of habitat for rodents and rabbits and things, but you still want a good you want to balance, I think, being obsessed with keeping it weed free and not having something compete with your trees. Okay, next slide. I'm not going to go through this one, but you guys have this. So I put this together. We had a field day out here about taking care of the kind of the understory, the ground cover management. And so, just some of the ways that you can take care of that ground cover on the left, and what are some of the disadvantages and advantages, and maybe if you wanted to compensate with some rootstock choices, and maybe what that would mean for soil health. So, so I use a combination of all these things. Um, we're talking about organic management. So there are some organic herbicides which are extremely expensive and not very effective, but maybe for some people those would have a place. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into disease control a little bit here. Um, Disease control is a big thing out here in the humid Midwest anyway. So if you're trying to get a lot of good quality number one apples, you got to be on your pests and diseases. So that is a big learning curve to learn all the pests and diseases. But I can just give you some ideas here of what I do. So I am focused on tree health, and I do soil and tissue tests to see what kind of micronutrients are missing and give the trees what they need there. I also do some foliar um, herbal fermented sprays, and I also give them whole fish sprays and compost tea. So those are all kind of things to me that are a little bit in the magic of it all, and I'm not really sure that that's doing a whole lot to limit disease, but I do think that those sprays do help with the flavor of our apples, but I don't have evidence of that. But our apples are quite extraordinarily flavored, and I do all these things, and I think there is some connection there. So anyway, there's also plant disease or plant health stimulators that you can purchase, things like Regalia and Lifeguard. Neem oil is another one. So those are things that help the tree use their own immune system to fight off disease. But even if you're kind of doing all these things, you're probably, if you want number one or more number one apples, you're still going to use some organic pesticides and fungicides. So we can
Can
go
can I
next.
can I just
Yep.
say one thing that a lot of times too, like if you do have some insect feeding or you have some issues with disease, a lot of these kind of nutrient sprays can then help the tree recover. So, and I think that probably also then contributes to the taste of the fruit later in the season that,
Yep.
that you've kind of helped it kind of, get a boost to kind of come back to health.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't have trouble growing a healthy tree. What I have trouble doing is growing um, more number one fruit. So keeping the tree healthy and growing, you know, I think with a lot of these things is not too bad, maybe with some other things, but to keep the fruit, relatively clean so that you can sell it to people that care about how their fruit looks, that's kind of the challenge.
So it's got
I,
that good, nice flavor when they bite into it.
Well, the amazing thing about apples is I wish people didn't care how they look, but boy, people care how an apple looks. And I mean, not everybody, but if you need to sell, 100,000 pounds of apples, you're going to need to sell them to people who care what they look like. Um, and when you think about an apple, it's like they're basically kissing it, so they're bringing it right to their face and they're looking right at it up close. So it's not like a carrot that you're chopping up and you can't tell what it is, or a potato, or a cucumber or whatever. um yeah, so it's an amazing thing about apples. It's unfortunate, but it's the world that we're living in. So yeah. Okay. And yeah, that's not to say everybody cares about that, but it just depends how widely you need to sell. And if you're looking at a small orchard and you can kind of pick and choose your customers, then maybe it doesn't you have a little more leeway on how things look. So just quick, these are some of the pests and diseases that you may have to contend with. Leaf rollers are things that chew the terminals of vegetative growth. More a problem when the tree is young. Aphids and mites, not really a big problem because usually in an organic orchard you have a lot more biocontrol, meaning other good insects that are taking care of the aphids and mites. I have seen a little bit of aphids in our orchard, but not anything that I would do anything about, and mites I haven't seen. Okay, so now these are what you call the big three: plum curculio, codling moth, and apple maggot. And those are the ones that will make your fruit unsellable, even for some non-picky eaters. So we'll talk more about those guys. Disease-wise, most of these are fungi, except for fire blight, which is a bacteria. So apple scab is something that comes in the spring. Fire blight can be severe, but like I'm saying, there's very weather dependent. Um, and fire blight is something that you can either have in your orchard and it's horrible, or maybe you don't have it in your orchard. So, yeah, so it's dependent. Cedar apple rust spread from cedars. So if you have cedars nearby, this is going to be a serious problem. If you don't, it might not be something you need to worry about. Black rot and other rots are I actually am having quite a problem with black rot in our orchard, even though I feel like our sanitation is not bad. Sanitation meaning you clean up old apples off the ground, or at least mow them and destroy them, and you get rid of dead wood in your orchard. But I feel like the rots are really specific for some varieties and not a problem for others. So black rot and bitter rot are two rots that I see on Honeycrisp, and maybe a little bit in Gold Rush, but really not a problem in other varieties. So sooty blotch fly speck is that if you ever grown an organic apple or picked an apple out from the woods, it's just the covering on the apple that is just on the surface. And even if you rub the apple on your shirt or something, you can take it off. Um, but this happens, the sooty blotch fly speck is actually a group of, I think, maybe like 100 different fungi that a lot of times of the come out of the woods and land on the apples. And while not causing any like major problems, the look on the apple or pear or whatever can be, so you're gonna have a hard time selling that, especially wholesale. Okay, next slide. How are we doing for time? It's 12:40. I think we're doing pretty good, right? Okay, so just there's a picture of plum curculio, and there's some of the damage that comes from it. Um, when the apple starts to get bigger, it might be more misshapen and have more divots and things. A lot of times, apple or plum curculio comes from outside of the orchard and gets into the orchard, but in organic orchards, since we cannot kill this guy with anything we do, um, they do tend to live in the orchard and overwinter in the orchard. So the only thing that we can really do with plum curculio is try to make its life a little more difficult than it would be without doing anything. So you can see that one tree in the middle there, that's surround, that's a clay product. So that kind of, you spray that on the tree, and the weevil doesn't like that stuff all over it, and maybe spends a little more time picking at itself to try to clean the surround off. Um, there are some other insecticides like Pyganic or Grandivo that you can do during times of high plum curculio activity, but none of these things will stop plum curculio from its steady march of destroying apples. On a warm night, this guy can oviposition, that's those curled scars there, like 300 apples in a night. So, in one night, it'll get rid of um, 4 or 5 bushels of good apples, just one bug. So this is my worst problem, and I do a lot to try to keep its damage minimized. But But if this insect wasn't on my orchard, I would probably have a new tractor. All right. Thanks, Plum Curculio. Okay, next one. Okay, caudilie moth is kind of the typical worm in an apple. So if you've ever bitten into kind of a wild apple or backyard apple and it has a worm in it, that is probably caudilie moth. Um, Now for this guy, this is something we can deal with. There's mating disruption, which are little lures that you can put up around the orchard that mimic the female pheromone that the males use to find the females, and that kind of swamps out all the female pheromone in an orchard so that the males and females can't find each other. This works better in larger blocks of apples. So, 5 acres or bigger. But even in my small blocks, which I think the largest one is about 1.82 acres. It still does a pretty good job. Still does a pretty good job, but sometimes you can see a little damage on the edges, which makes sense. The edges of the blocks are not getting as swamped by this pheromone, so there's a little more damage. There are some cottonmouth moth um, very specific pesticides that is just for caudilie moth and it's a virus and it's okay to use in organic production. So that's Sidex or Matex. So those are pretty much used by most organic growers and those work really well. Okay, well, I should say those work pretty well, especially with combination with the mating disruption. Okay, next slide. Any other questions on anything? Okay. Okay, so we're on to the third of the three big guys, and this is kind of apple maggot is what's going on now in the orchard. Um, so this is a maggot being that's the actual pest. It's a fly that lands on the apples and lays its eggs there, and the little larva goes into your apple. And it used to be called railroad worm because it doesn't, unlike a caudilie moth that beelines it for the seed, the railroad worm kind of does this in the orchard, does this in the apple, cruising around like that and leaves kind of a trail behind it. Um, Usually apple maggots go after early ripening varieties. So if you have something like yellow transparent, or for us, it's pristine, which is an early variety, that's really where we see them. So what I do instead of using these plastic traps is I'll go to the grocery store and buy a case of Red Delicious and cover those Red Delicious with sticky and hang, 100 of these red, shiny apples all nearby where we see the worst problems of apple maggot. And they're attracted to the red color. That's why these red spears work, and they go to those apples and get stuck in the sticky stuff. Um, that also allows you to know when they're coming out, when they're emerging from the ground, and when they're so when they're emerging. There are um, some sprays you can do for that. Surround is one, but at this time of the year, you don't want to use too much surround. That's that clay because it starts to stick around on your apples by the time you're harvesting, and you don't really want that. Another one is venerate, which works so-so for that. But basically, you don't want to allow apple maggot to get to be a big problem. So any dropped apples from early apples, you want to clean them up, pick them up, or mow them or destroy them, or get them out of the orchard, and trap apple maggot. Okay, next slide. So here's that sooty blotch fly speck. So this was, well, here I said I learned my second lesson. So this is gold rush, which to me gets horrible sooty blotch fly speck if I don't do anything. So this was not doing anything for it. And you can see, I mean, these are delicious apples. And it's true, you can rub off all this sooty blotch, but to me, I'd rather be picking them without so much of that on there. So just horticulturally, good airflow, good pruning can limit Sodium blotch and fly speck. It's also really variety dependent. Yellow apples can often be worse than red apples, or at least they show the sooty blotch a lot worse. Um, Keeping the humidity down in an orchard. So that has to do with mowing more often, maybe, and keeping the underneath the trees clear. Sooty blotch fly speck also come overwinters on brambles, multiflora rose, and prickly ash. And so what I use through the summer, especially in a wet summer like this, is potassium bicarbonate, which is it's actually a food grade, um, relate it's related to baking soda, but kind of a low rate of this on a schedule keeps sooty blotch down to a minimum. And so that's been working pretty well. Um, and yeah, but the other thing with this sooty blotch is like those, if you wanted to keep apples, this really limits the storage of the apple. It's like it doesn't hold in its moisture as well, and it can kind of dry out a lot quicker. So yeah, so I learned that a couple times. Okay, next picture or next slide. Okay, that was pretty good. So um, I am a huge proponent of talking to other growers. I love talking to other growers. And before this meeting, another grower called to ask about her sprayer. And so I have found that to be more instructive than anything else, which is just having a good relation with a lot of growers. So I am a member of Wisconsin Apple Growers Association and the Organic Fruit Growers Association. I go to as many field days as I can manage and winter meetings and just chat people up and see how things are going at the orchard. So yeah, I think that's Oh, get a job. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I just wanted to say on there, if you're thinking about doing an orchard, is that working at someone else's orchard is a great way to get experience. Um, when I worked at that other orchard, I mean, it's a great way to learn that you're learning basically on someone else's dime instead of making all the mistakes again on your own orchard. You could even do both at the same time, starting your own orchard and working at someone else's, but uh, growers are happy to hire someone that wants to learn and wants to work at an orchard. So I think, they would be happy to have someone work for them. So okay, that's it. Thank you.